Hi, and this is Erin. Thank you for watching my video. This is Myths and Legends. If you've been following my adventures with Lilly and Sasha, these are going to coincide with the creatures that we meet in the game. So this week we're looking at hobgoblins. I was quite surprised at the information that I found online about this little creature, and I'm hoping to share this with you. So the first thing you do when you look at anything with a name called a hobgoblin is you want to look at dictionaries to see what it actually says. So I use a system called Mimidex, which basically shows me all the different dictionaries across the world and what they say. So it was quite surprising actually to see what some of them were saying, because some of them are quite similar. So Mimidex in general, it came through as a small, grotesque, supernatural creature that makes trouble for humans. So in Wikipedia, they've got pretty well full information on it, talking about a term typically applied in fairy tales, describe a friendly but troublesome creature of the Seelie court. The Collins Dictionary quite simply goes an evil or mischievous goblin. Merriam and Webster literally just went a mischievous goblin. Macmillan British one went a small ugly creature in children's stories who harms or tricks people. The American Heritage have gone with an ugly mysterious elf or goblin. Wiki, a small ugly goblin that makes trouble for humans. And New World Dictionary has got an elf goblin, a frightening apparition. Cambridge have quietly stated a small ugly creature which causes trouble. And the Encartha Dictionary says same as goblin. They really went for it when they said the same as a goblin. There's one kind of common link going through a lot of these, is that it seems to be a trickster or a mischievous kind of spirit, and it tends to be ugly. Apparently we really attached that hobgoblins are ugly creatures throughout our dictionaries. So that's quite interesting. Now, looking a little bit more on Wikipedia, who really expanded on the subject, they found hobgoblin was typically applied in folktales. Shakespeare, in theory, identifies the character of Puck in Midsummer's Dream as a hobgoblin. But looking back in history, hobgoblin was actually two words rather than the one that we see today. Hob being a first name and has been seen generally used as a nickname for Robert, and the surname just being goblin. One interpretation from the Welsh derives that hob means hearth, and that they're described as a household fairy, and that can be traced back to about 1530. Although it seems to be, when I was looking through, there are a lot of quotations and things like that that are a lot earlier than that, so they've been around for a long time. Now, in folklore, I thought would be a really good place to kind of expand on the subject. As I said before, what we kind of saw in the dictionaries was this is a ugly creature. It uses tricks, it's mischievous. In one, it was evil. But actually looking back at folklore, that we don't seem to signify that together. So we've obviously shifted our interpretation. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, about how our view on what hobgoblins are has changed. Back in the past, we actually saw them as small, hairy men. They were just little people who were very hairy, and they were seen as close relatives to the Brownies, which you've probably heard of. A lot of those types of fairies are all found in houses or cottages, and they do like jobs during the night. So when the family's gone to sleep, they'll dust and they'll do a bit of cleaning. I would literally love if a hobgoblin came to do that while I was asleep, and all they needed was food in return. So there's one thing that I do remember from being younger in Scotland, is that it was customary to actually leave a parcel of food on the back porch step, and these was a little treat for things like brownies and hobgoblins to use, and it was to curry favour with the Seelie court. So one of the main differences they point out about brownies and folklore and hobgoblins is that brownies are seen as more of a peaceful creature, and little hobgoblins are fond of practical jokes. Now, there was a story that I remember seeing about how during the night, this gentleman felt something pulling on his hair, and then when he woke up in the morning, something had cut his hair and spread the hair all across the room. He kind of panicked a little bit, but someone else stayed in that room the next day, and exactly the same thing happened. Although they're not malicious in the way that they do stuff, they probably do scare the crap out of people by doing practical jokes like that. Another point reference that we saw in Midsummer Night's Dream is that he kind of points out that they shapeshift. So Robin Goodfellow, known as Puck, is perhaps the most mischievous and infamous of all these kinds. But the folklore showed that a lot are less antagonizing than that particular character. Like all most of Fae folk, hobgoblins are easily annoyed. They are mischievous, frightening, and can be dangerous if you've upset them. And attempts to give them clothing will often banish them forever. So whether they take offense to such gifts or simply don't want to work in new clothes for whatever reason seems to not really be clarified in folklore. In France, in the fairy tales that France tell, there is a division between good and evil, and they're very clear cut on how they see fairies who are good and fairies who are bad. Welsh fairies, which are, now I may pronounce this wrong, Talwig Teg, and the Irish as Eshi, are usually not classified as wholly good or wholly evil. So again, they're just what they are. They're instinctual. Having now looked back at folklore and fairy tale and past, how we kind of changed this hobgoblin creature into the smelly, evil, ugly looking character that we have. So I've picked out some few modern fantasies. Some of these hopefully you've probably seen or know of. So one that kind of pops to mind is Hogsquill from Spiderwick Chronicles. He's not bad, he's not good, he's just like an opportunist. He's not to be trusted. He will abandon people in dangerous situations. He is self-serving in that way. And he was born without teeth, if I remember correctly. But one of the main things that you find from the Spiderwick Chronicles is that his powers is that he spits humans in the eye to give them the sight. So they're able to see all the creatures and fairies of the forests in the night and things like that. Again, a very interesting version of Hobgoblin, and I have shown a picture of him so you can have a look at what I mean. Now, I don't know how old everyone is, but hopefully you'll remember Moomins. So there is actually a hobgoblin in the Moomins. He was called Trollkarlen. Now, this is actually a translated book. It actually means wizard in Swedish. It's interesting how they've kind of gotten the hobgoblin from a wizard. He was traveling around the universe. He had a flying panther, and he was looking for the king's ruby. And one very specific thing about this character was his top hat. And his top hat was known to do powers by itself. He always seemed to have chaos ensue around him, and anything you put inside the hat used to transform. So it was interesting, again, I've tried to find another picture for you so you can see him, how this kind of definition of hobgoblin is again changed by the people who are telling the story. Now this one is a little bit more obscure, but there is a book called The 13 and a Half Lives of Captain Bluebear. During one of these episodes, he discovers little hobgoblins on the island, and the way they're kind of described in here are semi-spectorial beasts that feed on emotions. So every night when Bluebear used to cry from his performances, it elevated him to stardom, but they used to feed on that emotion from him. And eventually Bluebear does leave this island, and this is a completely different type of hobgoblin than we so far we've looked at. Now, a more famous one, and I know this is seen as an elf, but there are a lot of parallels here, is Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. So everyone used to love Dobby. Now, Dobby was seen as a house elf, and he used to do all the cooking and cleaning, and used to stay out of sight. I've seen a lot of similarities so far. All he needed was food. Dobby got freed when given clothes, so he's no longer under the control of the Malfoys. So again, another parallel to hobgoblins. If you give them clothes, this banishes them from the household. So there's a lot of links there between what J.K. Rowling has described as a house elf to a hobgoblin. Now this is a little bit less, and I probably will get ripped for this, but The Hobbit from J.R.R. Tolkien. Now I love The Hobbit, but he does refer to goblins in his book, but they are actually like large orcs rather than hobgoblins. And one thing I did notice is that in Lord of the Rings, they disappeared. Like, he doesn't talk about hobgoblins anymore. He literally just talks about goblins and orcs. He's kind of seems to have learned what he's saying is different, because they're not being referred to as the same thing in the next book. Now, another area which really, really influences the way that people see hobgoblins, is role-playing games. We see them a lot. We put so much fantasy into role-playing games. One thing that people always know is Dungeons and Dragons and Warhammer. You probably see these in the bestiaries that you get with the role-playing games, and they're usually seen as larger, stronger, smarter cousins of the goblin. So essentially they look like goblins, but they're bigger, they're better. In Aiden Chronicles, as you've probably seen that game, hopefully you've played that, it's a very good game. There are like large thorny brutes, and they're all in the mountain pass. So again, they're seen very differently in this kind of game. This is where you start to see this kind of ugly, monstrous type of creature coming out, is how it's all being portrayed in role-playing games. In the Mage the Ascension, hobgoblins are actually hallucinations of the mage's avatar. So they're not actually real, they're just like manifestations. In Exalted, again the same White Wolf, their hobgoblins are warrior grunts of the fair folk. Changeling, hobgoblins are fey creatures that live between the divides between Arcadia and the mortal world. And RuneScape, for anyone who's played multiplayers online, they're kind of a weird cross between orcs and goblins. Again, really funny, RuneScape describes them as ugly, smelly creatures. So again, we've got this consistency of an ugly, smelly creature. But you can see from role-playing games, really we've started changing the way that we view hobgoblins, from folklore to these ugly, smelly brutes who often seem to be evil characters. With this all in mind, we've kind of looked through some misconceptions, because it seems to be there are always slightly different telltale signs, like with The Hobbit, where the idea of hobgoblins and goblins and orcs seems to get confused between all the different types of fays that are around. Let's begin with hobgoblins. So far, in folklore, they're hairy, they're good-natured, they do lots of cleaning for us in our house. They only turn nasty with their practical jokes if they've been slighted. If you're going to give them clothes, or if you're not going to feed them, then you're probably going to have some hassle on your hands. Now, the other one I mentioned earlier were brownies. So brownies, again, house fairies. So these guys are doing the odd jobs, cleaning, tidying up. They're often seen as going in rags. They wear brown hood and mantles. Again, offering them clothes will offend them. And really interestingly is brownies can turn into boggarts. So if you offend them and they start becoming nasty, they actually in reality turn into boggarts. But brownies and hobgoblins are pretty much essentially the same creature. The brownie is almost the Scottish equivalent of the hobgoblin as where the English see it. There was a saying before the 1700s that every house had a form of house fairy, whether that be a hobgoblin, a brownie, a bogle, whatever they used to have. And they actually thought they were being haunted. So they separated and had what we call a brownie room. Now this was pronounced a chambruni. And the chambruni was a just literally a room designed for that hobgoblin or that brownie to live in. So when they were irritated or they felt neglected or they'd got disrespectful treatment, they'd become mischievous. So the idea was that they had their own room, so you could put stuff in there, their food and what have you, to try and gain them on good favour. Though there are also rumours of people walking into brownie rooms and seeing a lazy, lounging hobgoblin. He used to sit there by himself and was known to exploit the kitchen and the barn and stable, but he would do it all for food. Now, kind treatment was all they've ever asked for. It seems to be a common thread throughout stories, is they didn't look for payment, you know, a bit of food. They didn't want clothes. They just wanted to belong, in essence. While some broggarts do evil, they will actually be helpful as well. They just do a lot of trickery and pranks at the same time. Harmless and good-natured, but they tend to not do anything they think will be, you know, truly injurious to the people in the house, as they don't want to be banished or getting rid of. Just to end on this, I found a very interesting a story about a castle in Scotland called Yester's Castle. Now this is now a ruin, but it's in the left of East Lothian, which is near the bottom around Edinburgh. It's the only remaining structure that has a subterranean hall, and this hall is called Goblin Hall or Hobgoblin Hall. Now, the original actual castle was built before 1267, and it's considered to be built by a gentleman called Sir Hugo de Giffard. Now, he was the grandson of the Laird of Yester, and he also served as a guardian for Alexander III of Scotland. But what's very interesting about this gentleman is he was by repute a magician and necromancer, and was known as the Wizard of Yester. Now, in his undercroft of the castle, he was thought to practice all his sorcery, and the 14th century chronicle John of Fordham mentions the large caravan in Yester Castle, and thought locally it was made by magical means, and the legend behind it was that Sir Hugo made a pact with the devil, and he raised a magical army to his aid to, carry out his will, and that the Yester Castle was actually built by an army of hobgoblins. Thus the name Hobgoblin or Goblin Hall. Now, as I mentioned before, not a lot remains of the castle, but the Goblin Hall is actually still largely intact, and I've put some pictures up for you so you can actually see it, which is quite cool. It's quite a large chamber, and it seems to be the oldest part of it is 13th century, and then it seems to have built more and more as it goes through the 14th century and 15th century with the masonry. Yeah, it's a very old, and it's a very old legend. Now, the wizard that we mentioned, the Wizard of Yester, which is Sir Hugo, he was to be considered actually a very powerful warlock and necromancer. There is actually a literary reference describing him as he was meeting King Alexander during the war between the Norway king and King Alexander. The literary says, "A clerk could tell what years have flown since Alexander filled our throne, third monarch of what warlike name. And eke the time were here come to seek Sir Hugo, then our lord. A braver never drew a sword, a wiser never at the hour of midnight spoke the word of power, the same that ancient records call the founder of Goblin Hall. Lord Giffard deep beneath the ground heard Alexander's bugle sound, and tarried not his garb to change, but in his wizard's habit strange came forth, a quaint and fearful sight. His mantle lined with foxskins white, his high and wrinkled forehead bore a pointed cap, such as your Pharaoh's Magi wore. His shoes were marked with cross and spell, upon his breast a pentacle, and in his hand a naked sword without a guard." So that gives you a really cool description of Sir Hugo as he comes out. So this isn't your secrets going around that he might be a necromancer or a wizard. He's full blown out in the open wearing his magic garb to do stuff. So I hope that you've all kind of enjoyed this update on hobgoblins. I've put the links below where I found a lot of the information and some of the pictures. There are some really cool websites like DeviantArt, which I all suggest you go to, as this is really, really cool fantasy drawings. I've never seen anything like it. Have a look yourself if there's anything interesting that you think I would be interested to see. Pop it down in the comments below, and hopefully I'll see you again next week with more myths and legends of whatever we run into in my adventures. Bye!